Welcome to Divorce on Planet Earth, Kate Sharf's real world advice for well-intentioned humans, a show for anyone who has shared life, love, and intimacy. Today's episode, no one gets how hard this divorce is. Will I ever feel better? I'm your co-host, Jane Prelinger, and your host is Kate Sharf. Hey, Kate.
Hi, Jane.
So, Kate, tell us a little bit about how you came up with the idea for today's show.
You know, I've been thinking for a long time about how many of my clients say to me, you know, in the early stages of their divorce, that they're the only person they know who's getting divorced, or, you know, who's ever been through anything like this. No one else in their social circle is getting divorced. And, you know, how can it be that it's 50% of all households, but nobody in my life?
Yes, yeah.
And I was thinking about that and how that can't possibly be true. But what it reflects is something about the experience of getting divorced, that how incredibly isolating and alienating it is.
Yes.
That when you're going through it, you really do feel like you're the only person who has ever been there, and that you'll always be kind of separate and other and different from other people in that way. And as by extension, that no one can, because no one has been through it, or no one is going through it that you know, or no one is going through it in the way that you are, that no one can possibly really get it.
Yes.
They can't understand
what you're feeling. Yes.
Yeah, how awful it really is. I think there's something about the sort of ordinariness of divorce, the fact that it's so common, that makes us kind of as a society a bit numb, or to just how really truly awful it is. I mean, I think people who experience a death in the family often feel that way too. Like, how can it be that everybody dies? How can it be that everybody in recorded history has experienced the loss of a loved one when it's this friggin' awful?
Exactly.
That is not possible. And I think that divorce, well, you know, the statistics tell us that it's second to the death of a loved one, and how horrible it is, and how negatively it affects us. I don't know how you really do that math, like what goes into the algorithm. Right. Death is awful. It's different versions of awful depending on, you know, the circumstances, the age of the person, you know, all of that. But divorce is really complicated, right? I mean, I've heard from a lot of divorcing people, like, well, in a way, it would almost be easier if they were dead.
I was just going to say that. I hear that from my clients all the time. At least there's a clear-cut thing to mourn. Yeah. It feels like there's more closure around the mourning, but I totally hear you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we want to minimize the impact of the loss of a loved one. But you know, we're not really comparing the two experiences, except when you are getting divorced. There is a tendency to compare it, because having the person who's broken your heart, or who is making your life hell every day, walking around the earth, you know, as a constant, like, sort of like representation of your worst nightmare. Right. Or, you know, having to co-parent with the person who treated you so badly it's
its own kind of hell.
It's its own kind of hell, right? So I think, I mean, I certainly remember, you know, when I was getting divorced, it's about 25 years ago, but, you know, the sense of having my life turned completely upside down, and the kind of the way it affected everything, like every area of my life. It wasn't just the loss of my husband or it was my co-parent. It was the loss of a dream, the loss of a status in our culture, the loss of his extended family, the loss of just, you know, so much. And I really remember, like, I remember going to my first attorney when I could barely, like, put one foot in front of him. Like, everything was a miasma. I was like walking through jello. And some days I just didn't even feel like I could breathe air, right? And I went in there, and she had me do a budget, you know, how much money did I think I needed every month? Yeah. So I wrote down what we had been spending, right? And I really I'd never been through this before, and I was, you know, I had no idea what I was doing. I did my homework. And of course, I wasn't calculating for the fact that we had to support 2 households on one income. Right. So she took a look at my numbers, and it was like the most shaming moments in school where you get the answer wrong. And she sort of said to me in the worst kind of like first grade teacher voice, Kate, you know, when are you going to get into reality? Like these numbers are not realistic.
What did she mean, high or low?
Oh, too high. Like I was never going to, I needed to slash and burn my budget.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I mean, she was right, but I wasn't A, ready to hear that. And B, I certainly didn't need to hear it in that tone of voice. Like it just devastated me. And what that says to me is that as a so-called expert in this field, whatever, whether you're an attorney or a mental health professional or whatever, it's so important to remember like the sort of the extreme pain that that we're in when we're going through this experience. And while maybe not all of our thoughts and positions are rational, they are totally understandable. Any way that one feels is completely understandable.
Yeah, that's important. Yeah,
I think it is. It's really important, and to also remember that someone going through this kind of, it's not, I don't even know if I can talk about it as a loss. It's like it's an upheaval on like every sort of across every vector of your life.
Yes.
Needs support and encouragement. Like everybody needs it, but it's so hard to find it. Like even if you're lucky enough to have good friends who are there for you and supportive and want to listen, they're going to kind of develop compassion fatigue at a certain point. Like if you're going through it, you want to talk about it all the time, but nobody else does.
I hear that from my clients, that they just don't feel that they can inflict this on anyone, anymore. And I've heard people who actually, from the other point of view, avoid picking up phone calls from their divorcing friends because it starts to get them too down. They just, compassion fatigue is exactly the phrase for it.
Well, I think it's hard to listen over and over to what is essentially unchangeable. Like, you can give advice, you can offer support, you can listen, but in the end, you cannot bring the person out of it.
Right.
It's just time. And that's really hard, no matter how close you are. People who are going through divorce are in so much pain that at least in that moment, they're unhelpable. All you can do is be with them.
Yes.
And you know what? I think that the part of what's so painful about being that person is that eventually people will default to advice, right? They'll try to do something that they think is helpful.
Yes.
Or they'll say, well, you were better off without her, which is never helpful. Right. Or it's helpful in the moment, but then it's also humiliating because you chose that person.
Exactly. Or I never could stand her anyway, or I never could stand him anyway. Oh my God, you're so much better off.
Right. And maybe that feels a little gratifying in the moment, but maybe not, because you're sort of, even though she treated you horribly and like cheated with your best friend, you're still in love with her, and that's humiliating.
Yes, right.
And actually you slept with her last week.
Yes.
Yes. And a lot of our families are also so frightened for us that they say things that are intended to lessen our anxiety, but are really based in their own anxiety. Like, did you ask your attorney to make sure that, does your attorney understand that his business is like growing and he's going to make more money next year, and you should ask for that? And like, it's just, it's having this kind of advice when you're trying to follow the advice of an attorney.
I just have to tell you a good one I heard. This is totally, this is a little bit different, but a client told me that when she told her mother that her husband left her mother said, was it because you didn't make breakfast for him every morning? I mean, what was she supposed to do with that?
Right.
I just asked. It was so shaming and made her feel so insecure and doubly alone. She couldn't talk to her mom about it.
It's horrible. Yeah. I mean, that's about her mother's insecurity, but I mean, what a horrible message to hear. I think people do hear that all the time, like, being blamed for your right. So I was thinking that maybe it would be helpful to listeners to hear, some of the kinds of things that you and I hear all the time from people who are going through this experience, because the experiences are all over the map, the things that we hear about what's particularly painful for a particular person, but they are themes that repeat, right? They're the kinds of things we hear from lots of different kinds of people over time. I think just maybe reading some of them, I mean, these are my words, but they reflect.
Oh, great. That's so helpful to hear them. Yeah.
So instead of talking about this theoretically, I just sort of made a list, and this is anything but, complete, but I think it gives us the feeling of some of the things that people talk about. And it's kind of heavy, but I'm hoping that it conveys a sense of not being alone, of how really common some of this horrible experience is, and that, people have come out of it.
Yeah.
So I'll just lunch in. Okay. You promised till death do us part. You broke that promise for your own selfish reasons. Now the kids and I have to suffer. Here's another one. It took 2 of us to decide to get married, but only one of us to end it. How is that fair? Plus, you want half my money and the house and the kids? Is that like existential
that one.
unfairness?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. I know we weren't perfect. And maybe I could have handled this if I didn't have to deal with your cheating. And the lying about the cheating. And the lying in couple therapy about the cheating.
Yes.
Yeah. I want that year of my life back. Lying in therapy does feel like stealing time. Okay? No one in our social group will want anything to do with me now. Fifth wheels make everyone uncomfortable. You were my best friend. We grew up together. I don't know who I am without you. I don't understand why you're so surprised and angry. Why won't you just give me a divorce? We've been fighting for years. In fact, you've threatened divorce yourself many times. Just let me go already. People will judge me. I'll get the blame. What do you mean you want me to say this was a joint decision? I will not.
I've heard that. Yeah.
I will not be complicit in the destruction of our family. Since my mother died, your mother has been a mother to me. Now she won't even talk to me. She won't take my calls. It's worse than if she died too. How can I tell my kids? I feel like an executioner. How can I not be with my children all the time? They'll be grown and gone before I know it. How can you be so cruel? You're going to buy our kids affection. You're going to keep our kids from me or turn them against me. You're going to leave me on the street. How can I ever trust anyone again? I hate you. I wish you were dead. I can't live without you. I wish I were dead, or at least unconscious. When I touch you now, you're like stone. You're here, but you're not here. Get out now. Please stay. I'll do anything.
Oh, Kate, you've really captured these sort of universal thoughts and feelings. I've heard them, I've experienced them, and it's almost painful to listen to.
I think it's painful to read them. I mean, a lot of them I really felt myself kind of choking up. A lot of memories coming back from my childhood experience of divorce, from my own divorce, and just thinking about how difficult it can be to sit, just to be in the presence of someone going through these profoundly painful experiences. And because they're so painful, I think they do have a tendency to sort of they do push, other people do kind of recoil, I think, sometimes.
Yes.
And it's a terrible feeling to have people withdraw from you in the moment you need them the most.
Yeah.
I think that's part
so
of it.
True.
Yeah. So I guess just another plug, for supportive therapy. I think because of how overwhelming the experience of separation and divorce can be. And just to say again, when you and I talk about divorce, we're really talking about the end of a committed relationship, not the legal, a marriage that has legal standing necessarily.
A relationship that you had imagined or, agreed to have continue.
Right.
Yep.
That
committed
you thought
partnership.
Would be right. You intended to be permanent. I think, I remember it was a very painful but helpful comment that one of my sisters made to me, the one who's closest to my age, when I was going through my divorce, and I was leaning on her pretty heavily for support. And she said to me, she lives in another city and was calling her a lot. And one day she said to me, Kate, I love you. I'm here for you, but I cannot be your last call of the day every day. And it was like it really was like an arrow through my heart.
Yes.
But she was right. Like, I had lost my last call of the day. Yeah. And it was going to be a while before I had another person who was going to be that for me. And I think the closest we can get to a last call of the day, it's someone who is really there for you without another agenda is a really good therapist.
Yeah.
Someone who can support you non-judgmentally on your, on the days where it's hard to be a good parent, or where you're feeling homicidal, or where you feel like you can't go on, or anywhere in between, and support your recovery, but not support you kind of staying stuck in the mire. Remind you that while it's a roller coaster in the beginning, and that recovery isn't linear, and it takes time. It takes longer than often we wish it would. It's hard to say how long, because there's no magical timeline for people. But that while all of this is true, that you're going to be okay, right? That there is going to be a time where the sky is blue again, and that person kind of that the therapist can hold that belief for you when you don't have it. And if you don't need a therapist, or you don't have one, that's fine too. You'll have to try to do that for yourself, or find people who are pretty good at reminding you that this sucks, not trying to talk you out of the fact that it sucks, but holding the hope, the belief in your capacity to pull out of it.
Yeah, that's just super important. It really is. And I appreciate what you're saying. Most people will pull out of it.
People who want to, who want to be emotionally divorced and are willing to accept that the marriage is over, that whatever they had hoped for from it and to get from it is lost, and that they have to grieve it. And if you're prepared to do it, people will pull out of it. You'll pull out of it if you're willing to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really important, Kate. Thanks for those examples, because I'm still a bit reeling from how universal and how deeply true those feelings are.
Yeah.
Good. Well, with that, I want to thank everyone for listening to Divorce on Planet Earth, Kate Sharp's real world advice for well-intentioned humans. We invite you to follow us on iTunes or Spotify, or on Twitter at Divorce for Humans. That's divorce, the number 4, humans. And on YouTube at Divorce on Planet Earth. And also read our blog, divorceonplanetearth.com. We hope what you hear on this show will be helpful, but since everyone's situation is different, our thoughts are not intended as a substitute for clinical advice or recommendations. And as always, we want to thank our star producer, Eric Piguero.
See you next time.